Have you ever caught yourself thinking that the sea is always a mix? Port, ships, merchants, foreign languages, marriages, new faces. Now imagine a people who live right by the Black Sea, on the shore where Greek colonies stood for centuries, where Byzantine and Ottoman roads passed, where every stone remembers someone else's sails. Logic dictates that such a people should have a noisy bazaar in their DNA, dozens of impurities, traces of all empires at once. But what if I tell you that everything is different for the Abkhazians, that their genome behaves not like an open harbor, but like a fortress? That behind the external history, the sea, wars, trade, migrations, there is a surprisingly stubborn inner line, as if someone has set an invisible seal, do not dissolve your own. Today we will conduct a DNA investigation of a people around whom there have always been many legends and even more controversies. Who are the Abkhazians really, the autochthonous owners of this coast rooted in the deepest antiquity? Or the descendants of later migrations who came from the mountains and settled by the sea? Why is their language one of the most mysterious on the planet, unlike Slavic, Turkic, Semitic, or even neighboring Kartvelian? And most importantly, what will be left of all the myths when cold, unbiased genetics comes into play? First, we need to understand where we are. Abkhazia is a place where the mountains almost touch the sea. There are no huge plains where it is easy to pass through armies and dissolve the population. Here, everything is decided by gorges, passes, and narrow strips of land pressed against the shore. And this is more important than any politics or any chronicle, because geography is the main scriptwriter of history. When mountains are a wall, they can defend as well as fortresses. And the sea, no matter how open it may seem, sometimes becomes not a door, but a mirror. It brings guests, but does not always allow them to become part of the house. The Abkhazians are the people of the Western Caucasus. Their language belongs to the Abkhazic group, which includes the Attic languages. For linguists, this is a separate universe, a complex system of consonants, unusual structures, and the feeling that the language was not carved for a flat world but for mountain valleys where every word must be precise, short, and tenacious. And here is the first trap of our investigation. Usually, language is a good trace of origin. If the people have come, they bring the language. If the people have disappeared, the language disappears. So, it seems that everything is simple. The Abkhazians are ancient Abkhazic autochthons, and that's it. But history never likes dots. Because nearby, literally beyond the ridges and valleys, there live peoples with other languages and other traditions. Because in chronicles, in legends, in the memory of neighbors and in their own traditions, there is always a theme of contact, union, hostility, assimilation, or resettlement. And most importantly, because the Black Sea coast has been a showcase for empires for centuries. And so the central mystery of our DNA detective arises: if the Abkhazians were really isolated, why is their coast a crossroads? And if they were open to the world, why is their identity so stubborn and whole? This is where two big theories are born. The first is the fortress theory. It sounds beautiful. The Abkhazians are the indigenous population of the Western Caucasus, who have been on the defensive for centuries, experiencing a change of empires and preserving themselves. All the aliens either left or dissolved, without changing the core of the people. The second is the theory of fracture. She's more dangerous. She suggests that the Abkhaz ethnic group could form in waves. That part of the population could change or come later, and the language could gain a foothold as the language of the victors or as the language of the dominant group. How do you know which is closer to the truth? Historians are arguing, linguists are arguing, archaeologists are arguing. But we have a witness who does not read chronicles, does not believe in legends, and does not participate in ideological wars. He cannot be persuaded, intimidated, or bribed. It's DNA. Our investigation begins with the Y chromosome. The male line, a genetic passport that is passed down from father to son. If there was a moment in the history of the nation when new men came and began to dominate, we will see it here. If there was a conquest, a military elite, or immigrants who took over, their signature remains on the Y chromosome. And now we are discovering genetic data on the Caucasus. And at first it seems that everything is predictable. The Caucasus is a zone of Middle Eastern and Caucasian lines. These are ancient farmers, ancient mountain populations, a complex mosaic. But then the eye catches on to one detail, and it holds everything together. Among the peoples of the Western Caucasus related to the Abkhazic language group, including the Abkhazians. One of the branches of haplogroup G, especially the sub-branches within G2, occurs with a strikingly high frequency. Not a little higher, not noticeably more often, but in such a way that it looks like the stigma of one powerful male that has multiplied and gained a foothold in these mountains. It's not just statistics. This is the plot. Imagine, you would expect to see dozens of equal lines in the coastal people, traces of all contacts. Instead, you see a domino effect. One line seemed to take and fill the space. And this immediately changes the tone of the investigation. Because such a picture most often means two things. Or a very ancient and very long period of isolation, when a small group of founders became the ancestors of the majority. Or a serious social mechanism, when certain clans, or military alliances were more likely to leave descendants. And most often, both together. And here I want to say, that's it, the Abkhazians are a fortress, the case is closed. But we haven't even gotten to the main point yet, because one marker is only the first clue. And any good piece of evidence is dangerous because it can be too convenient. We take a step back and look more broadly at how the whole Caucasus is organized along male lines. In the eastern part, especially in Dagestan, completely different branches often dominate, primarily from J lines, and there the picture is also skewed due to mountain isolation and ancestral structure. The central zone has its own peaks, and the western Caucasus, where the Abkhazians and their closest linguistic relatives are located, shows its own peak, the very G line. And this is important. The Abkhaz genome is not just Caucasian. It is West Caucasian, branded, recognizable, and here comes the first cliffhanger. If the male line of the Abkhazians is so strong and local, does this mean that the Abkhazians did not mix with the outside world at all? Does this mean that all empires have passed by, leaving only fortresses and words? Or maybe there was a mix-up, but we're just looking the wrong way. Because genetics has a second half, mitochondrial DNA, women's history, the line that we get from our mother, and she gets from her mother, and so on, down through the ages. If the Y chromosome is a chronicle of fathers and wars, then the mitochondria is a chronicle of the house, and she often tells a completely different truth. Sometimes the conquerors come as men, and the women are taken on the spot. Sometimes, on the contrary, whole families move in. Sometimes people change from the top, but the bottom remains the same. All this is visible if you look at two lines at the same time, and now we are opening up data on the Caucasus at the level of large-scale research. And we see one principle that seems almost like a law. According to autosomal data and mtDNA, many Caucasian groups look relatively close, while according to the Y chromosome, differences between regions and even neighboring peoples can be sharp. This means that male lineages in the Caucasus are often subject to founder effects and local explosions of individual genera, while female lineages and the general genome maintain a smoother picture. Simply put, men can draw boundaries, while women and the general gene pool are more likely to blur them. What does this give us in Abkhazia? This gives us a chance to see the truth about the contacts. Because even if the local lineage dominates the Y chromosome, traces of external marriages, migrations, and assimilation could appear in mtDNA. And the Abkhazian coast, it would seem, should be an ideal place for such tracks. And that's where genetics makes its second move. Not as loud as the first one, but more mature. She doesn't shout sensation, she speaks more calmly. In general, the peoples of the Caucasus have typical Western Eurasian and Middle Eastern branches along the mitochondrial line. And the overall autosomal profile of the Caucasian groups is surprisingly stable, with relatively few external influences compared to what one would expect from the crossroads region. This does not mean that no one mixed with anyone. This means that, on average, the core was preserved, and external flows were more often metered, local, not overturning the system. And now the most interesting thing is that if the Abkhazians really lived on the border of mountains and the sea, experienced huge cultural contacts, but their genetic core did not dissolve, then we must explain not only where they came from, but also how they survived. Let's try to reconstruct a scenario that could give just such a picture. Imagine the Western Caucasus as a network of valleys and communities. In such a system, the main resource is not gold or land, but connections, family unions, marriages, mutual assistance, reputation, and the ability to bring people together in a difficult moment. The outside world can come to the shore, trade, fight, build fortresses, but in order to become part of the core, it needs to pass through the filter of the community. And this filter works like a sieve. It skips things, words, technologies, and sometimes individuals, but it hardly skips the mass replacement of the population. As a result, culture can change faster than the gene pool. New borrowings, religions, fashions, even new politics may appear on the shore, but families remain tied to the land and to clans. And then we come back to the dominant male line. It fits perfectly into the model of a mining society, where certain clans have maintained their status, land, and the ability to leave descendants for centuries. This may be the ancient founder effect, where a small group of male founders became the ancestors of many. This can be reinforced by social mechanisms where some lines expand and others disappear. It's not better or worse, it's just how mountains write history. But we still haven't answered the main question of retention. Where is the mystery? Where is the other world? Where is the moment when the picture collapses? Because the Abkhaz history is not limited to one line. As soon as you start looking at the full range of male haplogroups you find in the Abkhazian gene pool, not only the West Caucasian dominant, but also traces of other branches, those that are more often associated with neighboring regions. And that's where the second-level detective begins. Not the Abkhazians mixed with everyone, but every small percentage is a separate story. One trace may be an echo of contacts with Transcaucasia. The other is a marker of steppe episodes. The third is an imprint of religious and commercial ties. In total, this does not turn the Abkhazians into the national team of the world, but this shows that the fortress was not airtight. She had a gate, it's just that the gates weren't always open to everyone. Now imagine the map as a scene. From the north, there are other groups of the Western Caucasus. From the east, the Central Caucasus and further Dagestan. From the south and southeast, Transcaucasia and Anatolia. From the west there is the sea. Abkhazia stands at the junction of all these directions. Nevertheless, the Abkhaz language and the West Caucasian male dominant speak of strong continuity. So the main thing was happening inside, and the exterior was added like spices. And here we have one of the most powerful psychological hooks for the viewer. If the core is stable, why is there a dispute about the origin at all? Why are there so many myths about came and gone? Why do neighbors sometimes tell different stories about who was here before? The answer may be unpleasant, but it's very human, because ethnic history is not just about DNA, it is also politics, memory, trauma, and the migrations of recent centuries, when entire communities could leave, return, or change their settlement. And such events can create the illusion of replacing the people, although the genetic core and language line remain much older. History can dramatically shake up the map, but it doesn't always have time to rewrite deep genetics. And vice versa, sometimes genetics preserves antiquity, but cultural labels change. If it seems to you that this is too abstract, I will give you one small material for criminologists. It's short, but it works like an explosion in the middle of a video. On the Abkhazian coast and in the memory of the region, there is a legend about people of African descent who lived among the Abkhazians. For some it's folklore, for others it's a historical episode, for others it's a sensation. And in the 21st century, a real genetic story related to Abkhazia appears, which sounds almost like a fairy tale, the story of a woman named Zana, whose origin has long been overgrown with myths. Genomic analyses have shown that her immediate genetic ancestry points to East African ancestry. This is not the secret of the Abkhazian people as a whole. It is not the main line of the Abkhazians. It is a separate human story, but it is important as a symbol. She shows that even the fortress sometimes accepts people from the most unexpected worlds, and these people become part of the local fabric, part of legends, part of memory. Not because there was a mass mixing, but because history loves rare, strange, vivid cases. And now attention. If such episodes are possible, if the coast could really bring unexpected people, why is there no huge marine mixture in the Abkhazian genome? Why didn't these episodes become an avalanche? Because the sea brings people, but the mountains decide whether they will stay forever. In the mountainous and coastal zone, mass flows are more difficult to consolidate. This requires either huge demographic waves, or forced replacement, or colonization with the relocation of families. Historically, other mechanisms have worked more often in the Western Caucasus. Trade without total settlement, political influence without a complete demographic upheaval, alliances and conflicts that changed power, but did not always change the basis of the population. And now we come to what makes the Abkhazian history especially DNA detective. This is not a story about sudden aliens, as sometimes happens among the peoples of the contact zone. This is a story about how in the noisiest place, by the sea, you can remain genetically quiet. It's about how an external story can be stormy, while an internal one can be stable. Now let us ask the most direct question. Who are the Abkhazians closest to genetically in the Caucasian mosaic? And here it is important not to fall into a trap. Because genetic kinship is not we are brothers or we are strangers. These are just statistics of common ancestors and shared space. And according to large-scale studies of the Caucasus, Western groups related to the Abkhazic languages often form a noticeable cluster along male lines, which differs from the Eastern and Northeastern groups, where other branches dominate. It's like the Caucasus is not one corridor, but several rooms, and each room was closed in its own way. The Western room is the one where the Abkhazians and their linguistic relatives kept their male autograph. At the same time, the autosomal level says, yes, there are differences, but the overall Caucasian profile tends towards the Middle Eastern origin of the ancient components and shows relatively small external infusions compared to how crossroads the region seems. That is, the Caucasus, as a system as a whole, absorbed the external in a measured manner, while strong local processes worked inside it. And in the Abkhaz case, these local processes are particularly noticeable. And now, the third cliffhanger. If the Abkhaz male autograph is so expressive, can it tell us something about a deeper antiquity? About the time when languages and the first unions were formed? Can the Y chromosome hint that the Abkhazic world is not just highlanders, but a relic of a very ancient population of the Caucasus? The answer sounds cautious, but beautiful. Such dominance and such local concentration often correspond to ancient lineages that lived in place for a long time and then experienced periods of isolation, drift, and growth within a limited space. This is not proof that they are the oldest on the planet. This is just an indication. The Abkhaz male line looks like it is deeply local and has been forming for a long time in the Western Caucasus. And a language that differs so dramatically from others may be a cultural reflection of the same depth. When a language is unique, it often means that it has been developing separately for a long time, or that its speakers have maintained stability despite the pressure of large linguistic worlds around them. And now the main point of retention. We have to connect genetics with the cultural code so that the viewer feels, aha, now it's clear. Why do Abkhazians have such a strong identity, despite living at a crossroads? Because historically they had the opportunity to preserve the internal structure of communities, which means they could control marriages, unions, and resettlement. Why did the language survive? Because language is an instrument of inner cohesion. In the mountain coastal world, language becomes not just a means of communication, but a passport to the community. You can trade without language, but you will not become your own without language. And if the language is passed down from generation to generation within a community and external people more often dissolve culturally than demographically dominate, then what happens is what we see. The genetic core is preserved, cultural borrowings come, but the skeleton remains. And now let's add one final touch that turns the investigation into a final wow. We started from the sea and expected a mishmash. We saw the fortress, but a fortress is not a lack of contacts. This is the ability to manage contacts. The Abkhazians have lived for centuries near major cultural worlds. They could adopt technologies, religious influences, and political models, but at the same time retain their ancestral mechanisms, their language, and their structure. And genetics shows exactly this, not total mixing or mythical purity, but the stability of the core in the presence of historical scars. This is especially evident in the male lines, because the founder's effects and social mechanisms work more strongly there. It looks calmer in the female and in the general genome, because the general Caucasian background is broader and more even. And so we come back to the main question. Who are the Abkhazians, fortress theory or fracture theory? In DNA terms, the answer is closer to fortress theory, but with one important caveat. This is not a fortress that has never opened its gates. It's a fortress that chose what to let in and what not to, which could survive empires without dissolving. Who could live by the sea without turning into a harbor cocktail? And this is the main lesson of their history. The strength of a people often lies not in not colliding with the world, but in colliding and not breaking down. Absorb and recycle, not disappear. The Abkhaz DNA speaks not about the mythical purity of blood but about the long-term stability of the Western Caucasian core, about strong local male lines, about how mountains and a community can maintain continuity at the crossroads of civilizations. Their story is the story of how geography becomes genetics and genetics becomes culture. And now I want to leave you with a question that sounds like a challenge for the next investigation. If the Abkhaz fortress turned out to be stronger than the sea, then where in the Caucasus is the opposite? Where did the gates turn out to be stronger than the walls, and the outside world really rewrote the genetic passport of the people? Write in the comments whose secret of origin you want to reveal further, and which version you consider more plausible before the DNA, fortress, or fracture.